All right.
Okay, so anyway, back at it here with my brother Dave Rutt, and we were just talking about the fact that when I did these videos with Mom and with John, I didn't always get a chance to talk about grandparents. I got a little bit, and I know John had a lot of stories about Grandpa Rutt, and then his Grandpa Rutt's I think father and grandfather. I guess I didn't realize how, like, I think John said that Grandpa Rutt's dad had been a farmer or something before, or maybe a minister. I can't remember. I'll have to go back and watch the video, but there was some stuff that I didn't realize
About what, Grandpa Rudd?
about Grandpa Rutt's father.
Yeah, John probably knew more than I did. I
Yeah,
didn't.
he had a ton of stuff on that.
I didn't know a whole lot about Grandpa Rutt other than that that Grandma Rutt was his second wife, and how how her kids and his kids fit together. I knew that much. I didn't know much else about it.
Yeah, see, that's the thing. See, that's probably what happened when he was sitting bored in Clarinda.
Probably. I did know that Grandpa Rutt was an avid fisherman. He was.
Oh, that's true. I knew that.
Yeah, he was a huge fisherman, I guess. And I know Dad tried to get me interested in fishing.
Okay, if I want to hear your fishing story, because I'll tell you mine.
Well, it wasn't much. It really wasn't. There
Neither
were
was
times when we'd go camping out at Rock Creek Lake. The campground butted right up against the lake, and so we'd walk down to the lake and do some half-hearted fishing. And of course, he had Grandpa Rutt's fishing tackle box, which probably by the time we got to it was just a shadow of probably what it was when Grandpa Rutt had it. It never really did much for me, and I couldn't quite understand sitting and just doing nothing fishing. And I think when you're a real freshman will say that's probably half the fun of fishing is not doing anything, just sitting and reflecting and being quiet and being on your own and everything else. And of course we never had a boat or anything like that. So anytime we did fish, it was right from the shore. So that was basically my, and I can't remember that we fished more than a couple of times. But I did remember that Grandpa Rutt was just a avid fisherman. And that was one, I guess that was his hobby, if you call it a hobby. Yeah, that was his thing.
Yeah, because I can remember that, I don't know if Grandma Rutt said this or our mom, but how Grandpa Rutt would really, he'd have the fishing lunar tables and all that kind of stuff, so he'd know supposedly when the fish were biting and all that kind of stuff.
Really?
That's what I'd heard, yeah. Okay, yeah, so my one time with Dad in fishing, he took me someplace, you know how there was that gas station going out of town, Fayette, downtown? I can't remember who it was.
You mean, yeah.
It was like right next to Schmali's in the shop.
Yeah.
So
yeah, that was what was his name? Anyway.
So yeah. I think he took us out on that road, and we found some ditch or gully or whatever. It must have been some stream, and we put the lines out, and we got the Cheetos out and had some Cheetos, and we sat for a while, and I don't think that we ever caught anything, but I mean, it was cool to spend time just with Dad.
Oh yeah.
So and now that you mentioned, I guess I didn't realize that so you think somebody told you that about that time that he passed, he was kind of maybe starting to feel like his nerves, his mental, he's going back into depression again.
Right.
So maybe that was part of that whole thing. He wanted to, because like didn't he try to take up golfing to maybe,
well,
relax.
He got, and that was kind of we kind of got into that because one of his sporting good salesmen gave him a set of clubs.
Oh no, I didn't know that.
Yeah, that's where we got the golf clubs.
Huh.
That was a gift from one of the sporting good salesmen.
They would call on the school.
Yeah. Okay. And I think it was a company that they mostly did business with for athletics. And he came home one spring, and he had this set of clubs, and you know, and he said that, yeah, it was given to him by one of the sporting good company reps. So yeah, that's where we had our golf clubs from, and they were okay. They weren't, you know, they weren't gonna have me tear up the course at you know, the British Masters or Open or anything like that.
Okay.
I think I was the I was the only one really that golfed. I think he did. I think he did get a membership in Big Rock Country Club after it was opened and built and everything else. And I said a lot of that I think was social. You know, if you're a superintendent in town, there are certain things, you know, you want to belong to. I mean, he was obviously in Lions Club because he was always in Lions Club. And in Fayette, that was, I think, the one. I'm not sure if there was a Rotary or anything like that.
Yeah, that's the only one I
Yeah,
remember hearing about.
yeah, there was a Lions Club, and he was always as far back as I can remember, even in Kellogg. In fact, we were talking yesterday about some of the breakfasts, and that triggered that. The Lions Club hosted. I'm pretty sure they were the ones that hosted. Um, I think it was an Easter breakfast up there, and they may have also been in charge of the Veterans Day breakfast. But I'm pretty sure that they were the ones that did the sunrise breakfast. Was the Lions Club, and we always went, of course, because he had to serve and work in the kitchen and whatnot, and so. But yeah, he was always active in the Lions, and but I remember that you know, I was, and maybe it was because I told him that, or I told him that I would go out, and I'd go out and play golf with my high school buddies, and occasionally, I think there was once where when I was working at Ingawanas, some of the staff members went out and did a golf. You know, we had, most of us had that night off, and so we went over to the country club in Waverly and did a round of golf, and then sat around and over a case of beer afterwards, I think it was. But
Yes, the 19th hole, as it were.
yeah, 19th hole. Yeah, we had our own social time. We didn't have to go to the clubhouse after that, so so that was kind of fun. But yeah, that was when the golf clubs came, and that was kind of our link. I don't know. I don't know if Dad ever did go out and play golf.
Okay.
So
Well, yeah, go ahead and like you said, you're kind of going down the list. Did you want to
yeah, I was going down my list,
do
and
some Lois and Jack stuff?
what actually I'm going to back up because
Okay.
other than the famous I threw Sue out the window story, you know, which we hash and rehash and rehash.
Well, that's
And
because she keeps hearing trains all the time too.
and trains, yeah, that was, you know, that was part of our supper. You know, mom still used that picnic table out in Fayette, and she's one of those nights where she decided we were all going to have supper outside, and and Sue swore she heard a train, and so that was kind of a running joke there too. But
You know, she doesn't like us to bring that up much anymore.
I know, you know.
See, that takes all the fun out.
John and I were calling her your toot and the whole thing. Which, you know, anything you can to antagonize your sister. But speaking of antagonizing, and I don't think I covered this when we were talking about Grand Junction, but yeah, we did too. Yeah, we did too. Yeah, she's always doing.
Oh, about throwing the. Yeah, see, I don't
Yeah.
remember. I don't know if I ever remembered that story about you throwing your doll down the staircase.
Yeah. Oh boy,
That was a
I
cool
tell you,
staircase.
if anybody knew how to punch my buttons, it was Sue. And you know,
Amen to that. Me too.
yeah, and then of course John loved to talk about you know, when we go camping, especially in Clear Lake.
Oh yeah, that's
We
a good story.
had the big restrooms and whatnot. Sue, being, you know, she was the people watcher. She had to see how everybody was doing their makeup and everything else, and so she would go and kind of camp out in the women's restroom area. And John, that was one of his when he said punch her buttons. He would go, and it was kind of because we were getting ready to. Usually, we were getting ready to do something, go swimming, have a meal, whatever. And of course, Sue wasn't around. and we knew where she was at. And of course, John was the first to stop. I'll go get her. And then he would always go over to the bathhouse and yell, "Is my sister in there?" She'd come out totally embarrassed and everything else. But yeah, that was little Susie. But then and then
I mean, so yeah, John and DeWitt are both embarrassed too, pretty bad.
oh, I'll tell you, the two of them had her number big time. And I mean, she had my number growing up big time, but they certainly had hers, and they really knew how to get her goat. They always did it any chance they could get. So, but then I got to moving ahead. I was looking at my notes and whatnot, and in the area of Lois and Jack, Jack was always, and it amazed me. The older I got, and the more I knew about him, he was exceptionally. Boy, I tell you, his intellect and his area of expertise as a college professor was in some kind of area of microbiology or something. It was really an advanced form. And for all of that education, I never knew Jack much more than he was the wisecracking uncle. He always had a line, and his favorite line was Pickett Wilson. He somebody'd start smarting off one of his kids or one of us, and he'd usually end the conversation with Pickett Wilson. And he'd go on like that. I used to think that was probably one of the wittiest things I'd ever heard. How did he come up with that? Anyway, but that was Jack. And then Lois, in all of the stress that she must have caused our grandparents.
Did you want to go into that for the people that are watching this might not understand about the stress?
Yeah, I mean, it was like, and especially, of course, we heard the stories from our mom that, especially when they did a lot of growing up. Their family did a lot of growing up in Fayette, because I think they didn't move to Iowa Falls until it was like midway through Mom's senior year in high school. And not to this day, but as long as she was able to, she would still go back to Fayette for the class reunions, because they always considered her a member of the class. But while they were living in Fayette, and of course he was a Methodist minister, and Grandma Clinton was always trying to keep her daughters pure and doing the right thing because of who their dad was. And Lois, of course, she was the socialite, and every chance she got, going out with boys and hanging out with them was always high on her list. And
you always got the sense with Lois that fashion was important to her and how she looked. And
yeah,
that look would attract the boys.
Absolutely. And so a lot of times, of course, Grandma Clinton would send Mom out to look for her sister, Lois. And I'm guessing that she always felt that June, our mom, was at least a little bit more aware of where her sister might be, because they were, even though Mom was the child of the family, they were still girls, and I'm guessing that Grandma figured, girls talk, and so being sisters, she might know where his sister might be. So yeah, it was always Mom's task to go looking for Lois around town and whatnot, and bring her home.
Mom would do it with her flashlight.
Yeah, Mom with her flashlight. So yeah, she was always the family go-getter to go get her sister.
Yeah, and don't you think that's probably part of Lois's reaction was to her mother, because as you said, Grandma Clinton was very reserved, very modest, trying to be the typical pastor's wife. And so Lois's way to, break apart from that was to go the other way.
Oh, I think absolutely it was. And, and back when, and of course, that carries on into her later life, when she was working on her master's at Michigan State, which is where she got together with Jack, I think. He was a grad student, and I think she was a grad student. Anyway, and it really kind of throwing caution to the wind, because she knew, and again, growing up with our grandparents, it never once occurred to me that they were so ecumenical that it never occurred to me that there was a time in their lives where they were just the opposite. When Mom told us that when they found out that Lois was going to marry or had married Jack, who was Jewish, apparently they never talked to her until Barry was born, until the first child was born. They almost shut her off. Well, I guess they shut her off, saying that she had embarrassed the family, and how can a Methodist minister's daughter marry a Jewish person, and this and that and everything else, which I was so shocked when I first heard that. I thought, how can this be? Because growing up, like I said, we always knew them to be open and very ecumenical, and and of course, like I say, and we were talking about that in the other video about their tour of faiths, which was very popular in the whole Des Moines region. Church groups from all over the area would come to Des Moines and take part in that tour of faiths, and that did include Jewish synagogues, as I recall. And in fact, to the point, Granddad had such a good relationship with the Jewish folks at the synagogue that they even allowed him to take the big scroll out and show that and talk about that. And I'm guessing that even at that point in time, that was probably quite extraordinary, to have a non-Jewish person allowed to do that. But
Right.
But they also, they every time we went out to Binghamton, to Appalachian in New York, where they were at, it was never a dull moment. I mean, between the kids and those two, and of course then us, and Grandma and Grandpa were always there too when we were out there. And
Really?
it was oh yeah,
I didn't know that.
They always went out at least once a year. I think that was kind of their, I don't know if they call it vacation, or if they, trying to keep in touch with everybody and whatnot. I know that they at least went to New York at least once a year. And the times that we did go to Appalachian as a family, usually it was in the summer, but we had one winter, and for some reason, I don't know if it's because the way the Christmas vacation lined up or whatever, there was at least the maximum number of days where Mom and Dad felt that they could drive out and spend some time for Christmas and then drive back. And that would be our Christmas vacation. Well, we all piled into the car, and we got as far as Chicago, and then this blizzard hit, and we figured there was no way we were going to get out of Chicago. And of course, they didn't have all the interstate highways at that point, so it would have been, Highway 20, or until we hit the turnpikes out in the East Coast. And so they made the decision. We stayed overnight at Uncle Charlie, and in Chicago, and we left the car there, and we took the train from Chicago to, I'm guessing, Binghamton, or it must have been close to Appalachian. I'm guessing it was Binghamton. And then, so that was, and what an adventure. We, of course, the train was packed, so we, of course, sat in one of the cars, and that was our trip. Luckily we had seating all together. But yeah, I remember that was quite a trip out, especially the whole adventure of using the onboard restrooms. It was not quite as streamlined as it is today, but so that turned into quite an adventure. Anyway, when we got out there, it was also interesting because they also, and I'm not sure if it was then or we went out one spring or the summer or something. The church that they were going to, which I think was a Methodist church, ironically, Uncle Jack was not much of a practicing Jew, I guess, and which maybe that's a whole different type of history we didn't know about. I'm guessing Barry could probably fill us in on that, and I'm sure it was a spring or summer when we went out to visit out there. They were hosting church services in their basement, and they were kind of and I think it was because the church congregation they were part of either was a brand new congregation and they were getting the church built, but they needed some place to go and worship, and so they went to Lois and Jack's house down in the basement. And of course, Lois, being the keyboard master that she was, she played all the hymns and stuff on their piano and whatnot, and Jack helped with whatever they needed, what he was offering and things like that. So we had 2 or 3 adventures out on the East Coast. So growing up, we at least got to know our cousins, which I thought was really important because we didn't have that many. And so, and I think Dawn and I tried to do that with the girls too, because we obviously didn't have too many brothers and sisters, and they didn't have too many cousins. And so we tried to keep in contact with Sue and her kids. And on the other hand, we would always try and do at least one trip out per year out east, so they would know their grandparents and their nieces and their cousins. And so we tried to kind of carry on that same example that Mom and Dad did with us. But those are my memories of Lois and Jack and the family out there too. So that was always kind of fun. We never really got to be good friends with the cousins. I mean, we were acquaintance friends, and we were always pretty comfortable around each other. But we're never totally close. I think, like maybe our kids have been to Sue's kids and whatnot. So, and I think our kids are they're at least comfortable with their cousins out on the East Coast too. So I know especially Leanna is with a couple like that. And Laura obviously is, because she named Kevin after Don's brother Kevin. So there was all that. Let's see, what else did I have on my list here? We talked about my favorite Bible verse. We talked about the schools. Favorite teachers and subjects in school. Yeah, that was kind of interesting. I had in kindergarten, and I talked about Mrs. Meyer and in kindergarten, and then Mr. Peters. I talked about him when I was at junior high at Rippey, and then Mr. Radke, who was our band director at East Green, and and is so like the same way it is for being a band director. We became pretty good friends. We from time to time he would judge my kids and at contest, and we would see him at IBA and things like that. So he became more of a colleague and friend there. My very favorite teacher that I always remember is Mrs. Stranahan at Fayette. She was the most patient, understanding, dedicated math teacher that I've ever known. And when we get in those workshops and that they have in public school teaching, and they always ask you, try and remember your favorite teacher in school. And of course, right away I would zero in on Mrs. Stranahan, because she was me and math were, I think, to a certain extent, I inherited some of my math understanding or non-understanding from Mom, and especially when it got into the advanced stuff. I got through Algebra 1 in pretty good shape. But at Fayette, you had to take at least 2 years of math. And the second year, it was always in the same order. You would start with Algebra 1, and then you would take geometry. And then your third year usually was Algebra 2 or trigonometry. But then the fourth year would be trig. And so I got through. She got me through geometry. I had so much trouble understanding and relating all the theorems and angles and things like that. And I would go in almost every day after school, and she would sit with me for an hour or as long as I needed. And she would go through stuff, and then okay, now do you understand? And if I didn't, I'd tell her. I said, well, I still don't get it. And so she would back up very patiently and do it again. And then with her, she had a standing thing with her that if you got to be a senior in high school and you took at least 3 of the 4 math subjects from her, she would invite you to her house as a senior for supper. And she was an outstanding cook. She was a really good cook. And because of that, that's why I decided to take Algebra 2 my junior year. I knew it would be painful, everything else, but I wanted to go to Mrs. Stranahan's for supper. And so I did. And true to form, she got me through Algebra 2. You know, she spoon fed everything else or anything like. And as it turned out, at that meal, she had these souped up potatoes, and to this day it's still one of my favorite dishes, and we call them Mrs. Stranahan's potatoes. And of course, when I went home and talked about this, Mom called her up and said, okay, you have to give me the recipe for these potatoes. And she would do that. She would make Mrs. Stranahan's potatoes, and then I don't know, Dawn got the recipe, and so she makes those at least every Christmas and Easter, and anytime we have a big meal, a lot of times we have Mrs. Stranahan's potatoes and like that. So, but she was a wonderful lady. In fact, when we go out to the cemetery in Fayette, you know, I always kind of seek her. She's about about maybe in terms of address, she's about a half a block to the west of Dad's grave, and same general area. But you know, and in walking around the cemetery out there, you recognize the names of all these people that you knew or knew of, you know, which I found interesting and a little bit comforting at the same time. But anyway, Mrs. Stranahan's out at the cemetery right now. She and her husband. We talked about who changed, said something changed my world, and that, of course, was my conversation I had with Dennis Smith my junior year in college, that eventually led me to go from a business major to a music major. And I guess the rest, you know, is history. I did all of that because of that conversation. And then finally, there's three or four things in there that really I had to work really hard on. The probably the one thing that was advice was given to me that I remember is our dad had the philosophy, and he and I had this conversation at some point before he died, that, you know, we were all put on this earth to try and leave the earth a better place than when we got there. And I've always carried that through. If I changed jobs, I tried to leave the program in better shape than I got it. And I remember the last time, I think it was the last time I left Central Lee. Yeah, it was one of the times I left, because I taught at Central Lee twice, and I think it was the last time I left Central Lee. I wrote out this massive summary of every single kid in the band to give to, and I know why, because I handed the program off to, no, it was the first time I left, to Fred Kinney, who was one of my fraternity brothers, and to this day is still a good friend of ours. And he was going to take my job at Central Lee when we got out of teaching and went into Central Illinois to sell fundraising to everybody. And that's going to make my million. And of course, that didn't work out. But I wrote a short thing about every single person in the band, because I wanted him to at least be up to speed, or at least use that as a reference when he got there. Because I thought, you know, I want to give him the best opportunity to hit the ground running at Central Lee, so that there's not that much of a switchover. And it was, from what I understand, it worked really well for both he and the kids. He only stayed a year, and then decided he had a different calling. So he and his wife moved out to Wyoming or Montana, someplace, to teach at an Indian reservation out there. And then eventually he came back, and now they're over at Strawberry Point, and he does some independent things like that. But anyway, you know, and I've always tried to use that advice from Dad about, you know, make whatever you're doing, leave it in better shape than you found it. And, you know, when I pass, people can look on and say, okay, you know, he did some good. He had a legacy that he insisted on doing the right thing and teaching the right thing and everything else. So that kind of came directly from Dad. Hardest choices, probably the hardest choice I think I've ever had to make was when we found out that Mom was on her deathbed and it was going to pass. It was almost impossible. At least at that point, I felt it was impossible because I had just taken over the band program at Waldorf, and that was the Saturday that we had homecoming and a concert that night and all kinds of stuff going on. And I felt that there was no way that we could just pick up and come to Colorado. You know, the only saving grace was that we were able to FaceTime with her before she passed, and I felt better about it. But you know, it was one of those. But that probably was the single hardest decision I think I've ever had to make. Is you know, internally, you know, you got to go, and because she's our mother, for gosh sakes. But at the same time, you have this professional, you know, obligation. So you're really torn in two ways. But that was probably easiest, the hardest thing I've ever had to do. Let's see, what else do I have? And then you talked about that.
And maybe you can share with people watching this the fact that you have been very diligent about your research. You said 16 pages.
Yes. Yeah, I've through my history of teaching, and the more I taught, the more detail oriented I got, and that proved really good for me especially when I got involved as the chair for the Iowa All-State Band Program. You had to be a good advice from my good friend John About over at Algona. He told me that one of the things you need to do, especially when you're doing that particular job where there's so much to do detail-wise in setting up all the auditions and hiring the judges and all that other stuff, is you need to fight the battles before the war starts, because that way when it actually gets to that point, everything is lined up in place. But you know, I got very, very, very detail. I've always been kind of detail oriented anyway. So yeah, this is I guess a reflection. You know, when I got these 25 questions or whatever, I sat down and it took me a day and a half to almost go through every single one of those. And by the way, I made a roadmap on biking. The more I went through it, the more life adventures opened up and whatnot. And then, I know what it was. The last thing that you put in number 25, if you could change something about yourself, what would it be? And I don't think there's any doubt in my mind, if I could change something, it would be that I was more involved with raising Laura and Leanna. Dawn has done incredible work with the girls. I mean, she was always there all the time. And, you know, I became more of a workaholic than I think I even knew. And, yeah, I have a regret that was something that I felt that I probably could have done a much, much better job. Because I think sometimes I was there for my kids, with my band kids, before I was there for my own kids. Mm-hmm. And that bothers me now, you know, and it's after the fact. I know there's nothing I can do to change about it. What I can do is try and be there as a parent for both girls now. You know, sure. They still have challenges in their lives and concerns, and you know, and Dawn has always been, she's been just incredible with girls, and whether they knew it or not, you know, they had a mom that was dedicated and caring and loved them to a fault, and you know, I guess I'm thankful that she was there. But that was one thing that really struck me, and it didn't take me long to answer that one, because it's just, that's one of my biggest regrets, is that and I know they love us and love me,
That's
and
very, very honest of you to look at that reflection and take it in as it is.
yeah. So like I say, and maybe that's the Clinton philosophy. Okay, you learn, and Dad would even do that. You learn from it, you understand it, you relate to it. Now you use it to your advantage, and you go on.
Yeah.
And after 3 terrible years at I-35, and it wasn't necessarily my fault, all of it, but some of it was because, and I laugh about it now because it was so long ago, but I learned a lot in those 3 years that I was there. And when I got to my next opportunity to teach at Central Lee, I put that to good use. Everything that gone wrong, and a lot of those lessons that I learned in my first 3 years, it made me a much better teacher. And then from that, I started building off of it. And of course, as teachers, we steal from everybody else anyway. Like, you go to the workshops and you talk to other people at IBA or whatever, and you find out what works for them. But it's the same thing. You just, you know where the issues are, and you try and work off of that, and hopefully it makes you a better person, so that when your time is done, people will look back and go, yeah, he was pretty cool, or he did a lot for me, or so anyway,
He made the world a better place.
I certainly hope so.
Okay, yeah, you did a good job checking things off. Anything else you wanted to put in there?
No,
What you want to do about music?
Music.
Yeah, your favorite music.
My favorite music is Gershwin. I
No kidding.
fell in love with George Gershwin years ago when I first heard Rhapsody in Blue, which is my favorite song.
Oh, I didn't know that.
In fact, oh yeah, I even I even did a Gershwin marching band show one year.
Really? Oh, that'd be kind of cool.
I got a hold of a really good arrangement of Rhapsody in Blue that started out, instead of a clarinet solo, it started out with a trumpet solo, and I had a really good trumpet player who actually was a tuba player, but he played trumpet in marching band because I had other tubas, and Mike Schmidt.
Well, of course, like all marching bands have a good tuba player who can play trumpet. Like, what?
Unbelievable. Yeah. Well, we've got right now at Waldorf, we've got these twin brothers, and one of the brothers is a really good tuba player, but he plays trumpet in jazz band.
Oh, brother.
In fact, I even loaned him one of my mouthpieces because he, for some reason, didn't have a mouthpiece with his trumpet. And then he found it and gave me back mine. But yeah, it was, so it was, and actually the guy now is a Lutheran pastor in one of the churches in the Des Moines area. In fact, I saw one of his sermons the other day. I've got him on Facebook, and I followed the link. And so Mike was doing that, but he did the opening solo, and he had the whole thing. He listened, and I worked with him, and he started out with that trumpet solo.
Sure. Yeah.
I showed him how to bend it up, and except to make it easier, I did almost a gliss with it. So and then at that point I had probably one of the biggest bands I had at Forest City. We had over 100 people in the band at that point, and I had the band all spread out, and I had them turn around and just wail. Yeah, it was really cool. It was really cool. So that was my Gershwin show. And that was the other thing when I came to Forest City, and I found out that they had a classical heritage, and were kind of constructed in the Phantom Regiment.
Phantom Regiment, right?
Yeah, it was like, where do I sign? Because at Central Lee, I had gotten to the point there where I got them their first one at marching band contest that they'd ever had in the history of Central Lee, and but then after that, the next year, they went back to getting twos and things like that. And so when I got to Forest City and found out that they had a bit of they had gotten, I think it was 9 ones in a row at state marching contest, because the guy that I replaced had rebuilt the band program from it was just a mess when he got there. Even though Forest City had quite a long heritage of music and history in the Iowa band annals, programs sometimes go up and down, and they had kind of hit that low point before he got there, and he decided he was gonna do it by getting into this newfangled drum corps marching thing, and so he called up Tom Haugen. I don't know if you know Tom or not, but
Right.
Tom was over at Charles City at that point, just tearing things up with the marching program. He called Tom and wanted to know if he could bring some kids over and then teach the Forest City kids, and they did. And then he started winning big at Algona and some other places, and then like that. So when I got them, they were in the midst of a 9-year win streak going to marching band contest. I think right now they're 37 or something like that. So
That's pretty cool.
yeah, I was kid with Corey Schmidt. I said, yeah, I was 24-0 on marching band contests. He just laughs and he says, I'm not quite sure I'll stay that long. But anyway, but yeah, it kind of circled back in a very long way, but it's about doing the best you can and leaving things better than you found them. And I feel that way about the program at Forest City. In fact, Corey will say from time to time that, when he got to Forest City, that was one of the nice things about it. It was one of those things where he didn't have to do anything except turn the key and it was ready to go. And he's doing such good work. He's such a good teacher, and the kids love him. The numbers have gone back up, and they have a huge band program now. But he also realizes that I did, but he couldn't do it without help. And Dawn was every bit a part of the success of the program that I could ever been, because she would take the kids in middle school, and she was just a bulldog about having the kids. You're going to pay that money, and your parents are going to make that commitment. By golly, you're going to learn how to play your horn. And so when I got them at the high school, they knew how to play. They liked playing, and a lot of them were already achieving and like that. So it made my job so much easier.
No, I think that's what we found in Spencer too. Janet and Kurt work together so well. She kind of knows what his standards are, and she's kind of like Dawn in that way, that she puts the bar up there, and she demands them to get up to that bar.
Absolutely.
And she's not going to let them say, oh, and that's one of our favorite lines with our sixth graders. It's like, yeah, oh, aren't you cute little band people playing your instruments? It's like, we don't want to be cute. We want you to be exceptional,
Yeah. See, and Dawn would do that. She started them because we couldn't start them as fifth grade beginners. We had to start them on the summer between fifth and sixth grade. We got them for a month, but in that month, you can only basically get about 6 to maybe 10 pages in the beginner book. And then they would take the rest of the summer off. And so when she got them as honest to goodness sixth graders, she had to almost go back to the beginning with some of them and reteach them. At that point, there was always, and there still is, there's always some kids that decide finally in the fall, okay, everybody else is having fun, so I want to be in band too. So then you get some kids that are starting from the very beginning. So she had those kids in sixth grade band. But it always amazed me that by the time they got to that spring concert at the end of the year, she had them really playing good quality music and playing it well. And then she always said that the seventh grade was the tough year, because you had to transition them from that advanced beginner music to bona fide middle school music. And she would do it. And by the time they hit eighth grade, she had those kids really up and running and playing really good music and like that. So yeah, it's true. Coaches will say it, and those of us that have been successful in band, you can't have a high school program or an advanced program without a good feeder program. And I certainly had that. And Corey knows that too. He understands that every bit of the success he hopes to have at the high school, it's got to come from help with what Dawn does, and he appreciates that. She's such a good teacher, and she's very good at teaching and technique and like that. So anyway, so that's a good part of it too.
So when you just listen to music, what do you like to listen to?
What do I like to listen to? Jazz, easy listening. I love easy listening stuff. Things that you can just kind of lose yourself in and not even have to think about. Um,
Thank you
I
for
love
saying
I
that.
love symphony music, but a lot of times I prefer Afternoon of the Faun as opposed to Shostakovich or
Tchaikovsky, that kind of stuff. Yeah.
or Schoenberg. you know, I like things that are serene, and there are times I love Holst in the first suite and the second suite, and I like stuff like that occasionally. But when it gets down to it, a lot of times I just like and Sinatra. I love jazz.
Okay, well, sounds like you and I could listen to the same playlist because, like, lots of times at work when I'm proofing the paper, I'll put in the Jackie Gleason channel.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. See, and we have Sirius XM, and they've got a channel called Seriously Sinatra, and it has all of that, and Dean Martin and Sammy Davis Jr. and all kinds of stuff like that, and we listen to that a lot, and like that. But going to sleep at night, I always listen for about 20 minutes. I've discovered that the best way to do that is to put it on a volume level that is barely audible, because if it's too loud, then I'll really start listening to it and it'll keep me awake.
Yeah.
But they have an easy listening channel called Escape.
Right, I know that one.
Yeah, that usually has elevator music, I guess. And
I know.
But except there are times, I swear, and there's a pops channel. It's called Sirius XM Pops, which we really like. And then of course there's the classical channel too. But I don't know who programs music for them. But it seems like a lot of times when I want to listen to stuff on pops that's maybe laid back and everything else, they decide they're going to play Beethoven or something and bombastic stuff. But they'll do that every once in a while with Escape too. Is they'll start playing some of this, happy, dancy stuff too. And I just sometimes I just have to roll over and turn the radio off because it's like, oh, I can't do this. But that's the kind of I like almost every kind of music except country music. I mean, I can understand music, I can appreciate country music, but it's just not my thing, and I know right now country is hot. Everybody loves country music.
Well, especially in rural Iowa, they always love it.
And maybe that's where we're hearing most of it is because we live in rural Iowa. But
I never really got into country music until I worked out at the airport, and that's all the mechanics listen to at night. And then to hear it all the time. So then you kind of, and we do have a big country radio station here in town. So, but okay,
everybody has a country music station. I mean, even KIOW here in Forest City, they play their share of country music. They try and do a lot of popular music, but at this point, every once in a while they'll throw in a whole series of country music, and it's just not for me. I much prefer all those other kinds too. So
I find sometimes my ears go like by the school year. It's like, in the summer I want to listen to drum and bugle corps stuff, and then then you listen, when you have the holiday concerts, you want to listen to more Christmas arrangement stuff, and then when it gets around solo ensemble time, you want to listen to more, ensemble kind of solo pieces and stuff.
Yeah.
And then, when it's jazz band season, then I get even more jazz stuff, and I'll go back and listen to stuff that like we used to do at Roosevelt and stuff like that.
Yeah. And that's one of the things that I've always loved about XM is, it just seemed like, and it was the big thing when we first started traveling out east to New York. That was way before satellite radio was even in existence. And it was like, it was always frustrating to me because when you're traveling, usually we would go straight through, and you would just get a radio station that was interesting and listenable, and you drive out of range, you know,
Yeah.
and all of a sudden you got the gospel station on, or you got the country station that bled into it and everything else. So now you have to play with the dial again to try and find something. And you know, we had a few along the way where we kind of, like, if you're in Indiana, this is where you should go, and if you're in Ohio, this is where you go, and Pennsylvania, this is. But when we finally got an XM receiver we could put in the car, that was so much better because we could listen basically to the same music all the way out and back if we wanted to, or you could change it. And it just seems it's so much easier. And
I know, makes the trip go along. Yeah, that's kind of what we found when we go to Cedar Falls to see Sarah. It's like we would figure out, okay, now we're near Fort Dodge, we can get the Fort Dodge stations, we get the
yep,
Mooring stations, and then we
yep,
get closer to Cedar Falls, we get the Waterloo station. So
yep,
yeah, but
yeah.
yeah, and you said, like you said, you're not a book reader like John.
Not, I mean, we're opposites there. I mean, he didn't see a book that he didn't like. Dawn reads all the time. She's a wonderful reader. She reads all the time.
Yeah, so is Tierney.
Rarely. I mean, I've a couple 3 years ago, I found a series, an author that wrote they were fictional mystery kind of things, and I really liked the way she wrote, and they weren't extremely long books, but they were well written and had nice flow and everything else. And I got as many of her books as I could find in the different parts of the series. And now I don't know if she's either quit writing or died or whatever, but it's harder for me to find her books. I can't remember who she was because I was thinking about that.
Yeah, I was gonna say, yeah, if you figure out who the author is, let me know. It'd be nice
Okay.
to stick in one of these videos.
Yeah, because it's I love her writing. It's interesting, and it keeps people like me involved. And I think I've always been a TV person. I've always been a visual person, even when I was a kid. You know, in Kellogg, I remember John and I would lay on that old red carpet that we had that went several houses. That I think at least through Kellogg. Of course, when we got to Newton, we had a brand new house with carpeting already in it, so the old red carpet finally gave up the ghost. But I remember laying on that carpet in Guernsey and watching you know, Mickey Mouse Club, and what else did we see at night? I don't know. I had two or three. Well, in the morning you saw Captain Kangaroo and House of the Magic Window, and then in the afternoon you had Mickey Mouse Club, and that was kind of I guess maybe Bozo or whatever the cartoon shows were that were on after that. I mean, when we were in Fayette, even growing up in Fayette, there was Dr. Max and Mambo. I don't know. Did you ever see him?
Yeah, no, see, and that was really cool. I mean, I got into Dr. Max and Mambo, and Tierney's cousin who lived in New Hampton.
Mm-hmm.
She and her brother, of course, knew about Dr. Max and Mambo too. And then Tierney, of course, lives on the northwestern side of the state. So
Yeah.
there was a guy out of Sioux City that did a kind of same thing. But so whenever I talked to Tierney's cousin, we'll always reminisce about, hey, Dr. Max, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I always thought he was the silliest guy. And Mambo, I thought, you know, how dumb is this? You know, this old guy and then this clown. But he showed good cartoons and whatnot.
I know, Three Stooges.
Yeah. And which I still find kind of funny. Don thinks they're the stupidest things.
Yeah, most guys like them, most women don't. So yeah, there you
go. Yeah.
So like, you've got some other stuff to share, but I was gonna say, is there any certain Bible passage or Bible story that always comes to mind? I know mine. I guess the first one I always remember, I always thought it's the one where Jesus says, bring the little children to me and do not hinder them. It's like, I always thought that was a cool one, especially when I was a kid, because I thought, oh, that's cool. Jesus is talking about a kid, you know?
Yeah. Well, like I said yesterday, my one and only verse was from Deuteronomy, and that was dealing with the Ten Commandments.
Sure.
And that always hit home to me, even then when I learned the thing, and of course had to memorize it. You know, growing up, Granddad always made the Sermon on the Mount
Oh
so
yeah,
interesting,
sure.
you
Yeah.
know, and I always bought into that just because, you know, and that was one of the really cool things. There's a lot of cool things about Granddad, but that was one of the cool things. He would take interesting stories like that, and he would add like three more dimensions, and then he would go into his workshop, and then he created that Sermon on the Mount uh, thing
A
that is
picture,
still at
yeah.
that is still at the first church. And I again, we've talked about this. I remember John and I um, got to paint a palm on the thing there.
On the last parade.
Yeah, on the last
Oh,
parade.
okay. Good for you.
But but he did, and I can't obviously can't have any idea where I put it, but I
Yeah, I
remember.
know. Who could? But
In
I
fact,
mean,
I've looked at that every time we go to the state fair, and it's still in there. I look at that thing trying to play back. Okay, I was this young, so I was probably this tall. So where would I, you know, maybe it's down in the bottom someplace. Anyway, and I look at that thinking, okay, where might you play this little game? Like it's like I have no idea where it's at. I just remember I did, and like that. But he would do that. He would come up with visual enhancement or whatever to add another dimension to all kinds of stories. And that's what is always so interesting listening to him speak, you know. And it was amazing how much he could say in his allotted time and still get his services done an hour or less. You know, he
yeah.
was just, he
And that,
had he was absolutely adamant that a church service should go no longer than an hour, which, you know, anybody who knew Granddad Clinton knew that the man, he could talk, and like me, he could talk and talk and talk and talk, and he always had something to say. But when it came to that structured church service, he would say what he needed to do. He had a great time doing it. He would entertain the audience, and he would still have time for the offering, and he'd get you out the door in an hour. And you know, that's admirable when you're that kind of a public servant and whatnot, that you can do that. And he had so many gifts, but yeah, he was so, you know. And then I remember, and I put that as one of my notes, that, you know, one of his projects is when, I don't know when it was, but he got it in his head he wanted to expand on his art, so he started taking art classes at the Des Moines Art Center. And then of course he had his little art set up down there next to the furnace. But then he, you know, he would go down there and he would work, and he had his white painter's coveralls that he wore for a while. He was doing that, and then he painted this backdrop as a beautiful, and I don't know if it was one of his pictures that he took, and then he had blown up and put on a clear plastic backdrop, and he turned it into a backdrop for his, because I think he wanted something to fill that gap between his painting area and the shop, because I think that before he set that table and stuff up, it was an open walkway between the furnace room and his shop area, and he decided that anyway. So he made this big thing, and he could turn on the light and light up this whole picture, which I always thought was kind of cool too.
hmm.
So um, anyway, but yeah, Granddad Clinton was quite a master at bringing
That
the
was the thing
Bible.
about his sermons. He always had a prop or a gimmick or something to hook you into it. It
Yeah,
seemed like, you know,
yeah,
that's why his sermons were not just a basic sermon.
no,
You know, he had something he brought along, or you know, some, you know, he would do some word thing, you
yeah,
know, acrostic or something. You know, it's like, yeah,
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 yeah.
like you say, he educated you, he entertained you, and so in some ways, you know, as teachers, I think probably you and I both have kind of gotten into that Clinton side of him, that you know we
More times than I know, or more
you know
times than
we
I
want
want to
to
admit.
work with kids about music, but we also want to help those kids, and we
Yeah,
know if a kid's attention is only so long, so you've got to do something to
yeah,
you know snag them in.
yeah. I still do that to this day, even when I have my municipal band concerts. You know, I like to talk to the crowd. You know, in a way, with municipal band, you need to give some of those players some time to recover, especially
And
the
they
first
appreciate
concert of the
that. Thank
year.
you, Dave.
yeah, and and I know that I've got I usually program enough music that between the music and my talking, I can do a municipal band concert in 45 minutes. I always try and do a municipal band concert in 45 minutes, because we start at 7:30, and I try and have them done by like 8:15 or 8:30 at the tops. And but I do that. Even with the high school programs, the kids are always kidding me about, you talk too much, or you talk more than we play, and things like that. But I think I've always taken my cue from Granddad Clinton, because I want to entertain. I want the people. I don't want them to go to sleep. I want them to be involved in active participants in all my concerts. And if that means telling a story, or telling a dumb joke, or talking about one of my kids, or program notes or whatever, I try and entertain as well as entertain with music. So I've always taken my cue from Granddad Clinton on that one too.
Okay, what else do you got on your list? I've got a few things.
That's it on my list.
Okay, how about a good story about mom?
Oh. um, well, like I say, my biggest stories about mom had to do with she and dad going round and round and round, with the financial books, and
And then
and
mom would go round and round with John Grow.
yeah, and then yeah, when she got down there, which I always got a big kick out of. Where would she end up working when she came to Des Moines? End up working at Drake, and where did she end up? In the financial aid office, where she has to do bookkeeping. And I thought, what could possibly go wrong on this one? But she, she kind of struck up that same relationship with the Groves, that she and Dad would always go back and forth and back and forth. And I think John always got a kick out of her, and whatnot, and they kind of connected because of that and whatnot. Um, but yeah, my favorite stories with her had to do with her back and forth with Dad, and of course when she got totally upset with me for socializing more
Oh
than,
yeah, that was a good story. Yeah.
yeah, and then by God, you're gonna be at church and do that part of your trip too, and yeah, that's probably my number one story with mom is,
Okay.
and then from then on, I mean, actually, we always had a relationship that she would give me her 2 cents worth, whether I needed to hear it or not, and then okay, now you know how I feel, and we'll go on, and
Yeah, I got that from mom every once in a while too. That's for sure.
yeah, yeah, she would make sure you knew how she stood on things. And of course, the older she got, the filters kind of faded away, and
Yes.
then she really told you how she felt one way or the other, and like that. But yeah, that was one thing with mom. She was always that way, and she's one of the most Christian loving, wonderful people I think I've ever known, and 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 that was a good thing,
Yeah.
She,
No, I mean it's kind of amazing that she got into bookkeeping and that kind of stuff because have you ever saw any of Granddad's ledgers?
yeah,
He was meticulous about, especially
oh, he
on those
was,
trips.
yeah, he
He
was,
kept track of every single thing that he had bought and purchased, and so,
oh yeah,
you can see that, that he knew the value of a dollar, and so he kind of instilled that in mom. So
yeah,
that's why it's surprising to find out that mom and dad would go back and forth about how she would. Because I'm guessing mom would pretty nickel and dime about everything she could.
yeah,
Because she never met a good deal she didn't like.
oh yeah, yeah, and use stuff, reuse stuff, and then when in doubt, put it in the freezer because you'll need it sooner or later. You know, and I know Sue and Don and I we like to laugh about that because it got to the point when she was at Wesley Acres. We would go out in the main area out there, and while we were out there, Sue and Dawn would be raiding her freezer and throwing out stuff that was God knows how many years and months old, and had freezer burn beyond freezer burn. And so yeah, it was it was always an adventure to find out what mom still had in her freezer. But a lot of that is depression stuff. You know, never throw anything away. Take, you know, eat everything you can, save what you can, and like that. But that's a lot of that's, you know, she grew up in that where you never took
So,
anything for granted, especially food.
so what'd you use for your favorite story for Dad then?
Dad, I had two or three with him.
Obviously, it wasn't with fishing.
No, but one thing I really like to remember about Dad is when we would go. Well, he would, and Don and I have talked about this a lot when we're sitting around our own trailer usually down at Little Wall Lake, or just
Right.
relaxing and enjoying what a great thing it is we have this trailer. But I remember, especially when we were in Fayette, Dad would come home on a Friday afternoon and he would say, "June, we're going camping." And she had stuff in the freezer. She always had stuff ready, just, you know, because she knew he was going to say it. So she'd pull some things out of the freezer. Each one of us were in charge of grabbing our own stuff and taking it out to the trailer. And while we were doing all of that, Dad would be working on hooking up the trailer. And, you know, it was like a system. But he always had, "June, we're going to go camping." And we would go out Backbone or we're at Clear Lake or wherever. And, and that was, but I remember that. But every time we would go camping, Dad would wake us up in the morning with singing when it's roundup time in Texas.
Oh, really?
He would, I don't know if you don't remember that. I remember that.
I don't remember that. No.
Yeah, it's like we would be laying there either asleep or trying to figure out, okay, can I lay here or do I have to get up? And Dad of course would be up doing something. He'd be out making a fire in the fireplace or made coffee or whatever. And then he'd start singing, "When it's roundup time in Texas," and the you know, and we're going, "Oh, for God's sakes," you know. It was
So
like,
this is when we're out camping.
yeah, yeah, that was the way
Oh,
he always did that first thing in the morning. He'd start singing when it's roundup time in Texas.
okay. Well, that's a classic then.
Yeah,
Cool.
that's a dad story. And you know, and then he was and then of course obviously the when we were at Fayette, you know, we got to help him with stuff, with all the supplies and whatnot. But then it got to be, especially with John and I, when Dad would start the conversation with, "Okay, boys, we're going to do," and at that point we knew exactly what we were going to do because that's what Dad said we were going to do. So yeah, he says, "Okay, guys, we're going to do this and this and this." And when I was teaching, I took that a step further. I did that with my bands all the time. When it was time to clean or whatever, we do something around the band room, and I say, "Okay, guys, we're gonna have a band togetherness activity." I always called this my band togetherness activities. And when I said that, the kids knew we were going to clean something, we were going to straighten something up. And I always had the band uh, segmented. "Okay, trumpets, I want you to take this room. Clarinets, you guys are in this room. Flutes, you guys sort this music. And percussionist, of course, percussion, that was easy. Clean up your mess back there." But that was, I took Dad's, "Okay, we're going to do this." I took that. That was my version of Dad. Okay, we're going to have a togetherness activity.
Yeah. Okay.
So
So
those are my dad's stories.
those are pretty classic. Okay. Um, how would you like to be remembered?
Uh, like I said, that I left the world a better place than I came
Okay.
to. Yeah, and again, that's a dadism. But you know, every place I've taught, I've tried to leave it in better condition. Um, I would like people to know that when I passed, that I had done good.
Yeah. And like you said, you and Don are going to be buried up next to Mom.
We are, and she figured that out faster than I did. You know, I guess I'd never given too much thought, but when we were talking about that, and maybe you were talking about John burying up there, but then we found out that in addition to Mom and Dad and Mary Beth, that there were actually, and then we were looking at John's grave, that I think that there were, when we were looking at John's grave, we found out that there were 4 available for 4 slots. And so it was easy to put John in there. And then Don says, "Well, I just always figured we would be buried at the family plot there in Fayette." And when she said that, it was like the light went on. I'm going, well, of course, that makes sense. Because, as much as most of my young life kind of relates to Kellogg, not so much in Newton. I had good times and everything else and made some good friends and whatnot, but Kellogg was a big part of my growing up and in the youth. And Fayette has had a major impact on me as a young adult and beyond, because that's where I did a lot of my maturing and growing up and whatnot. And of course, then meeting Dawn and everything else. And she's made the observation that she spent easily more years in Iowa than she ever did in New York State. And
Sure.
she's more connected to our family even than she feels sometimes she is to hers. And in her opinion, that was a logical place that we should be buried. And when she said that, like I said, the light came on, and I'm going, well, of course, it just made a lot of sense. So yeah, that's where we're going to be buried. And talking to the guy that was the gravedigger there that day that we buried John,
Right.
and he even said, well, you could actually arrange this. You could be buried one on top of the other or next to each other, because
Wow.
we want to be cremated, of course, and which doesn't take a whole lot of space. But he said that, or I don't know if we were talking to the funeral director, one of the two of them, maybe it's the funeral director, one of the two of them came up with that option. He says, there are couples that they'll do that. They'll be buried either next to each other or on top of each other, just for space, but also for that being one in death and like that. So yeah, that's it.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah,
So,
it's interesting listening to Sue, because I think in a way it kind of tugs at Sue, but she's really connected to Colorado, obviously, because that's where Danielle and Keith and Gabriel and that's kind of her life and has been for a very long time. So I can understand that.
yeah, but there's some part of Sue that I think really wants to be next to Mom.
Oh, I don't argue that a bit. And I've when we were talking during the time we were there at Fayette for John's burial, um, which was, I really enjoyed that weekend. That was so much fun.
Yeah.
Being out at the campsite with Wes, and then the time at the cemetery and just around Fayette for a while, and then down in Des Moines and whatnot. Yeah, I got that. That she has that same connection to Fayette that we do, and then of course being next to her mom and even mom and dad, I could see that, I suppose. Yeah.
But that's her decision. We'll let her do that. So.
Oh yeah.
Okay, so you said that the night Dad died, you never got to see him get taken out.
No, he was already gone.
I thought for sure you were there.
No, when John and I got home, he was gone already.
Wow.
Yeah, and I don't know. I think I told you this story, but I had this dream several times and it was back when we were living on Water Street, the other house, where I would come in the front door and the house was up in arms. Where everybody was wailing and upset and everything else. And somebody told me that Dad had died. And I had that dream either 2 or 3 times, and it's the same dream. And then and it was almost that way, because John and I came in the back door like we always did, and Mom met us at the door in the kitchen there, and she said, well, your dad has died. And it was like a flashback, really weird, but it was like a flashback. And I thought about that, and at the time immediately it didn't hit me, but it didn't take me long to replay that in my mind. I thought, oh my gosh, I've replayed this in a dream 2 or 3 times already.
Wow.
A different house, but the same scenario. And yeah, but then no, they'd already taken him out, and Grandma had already gone back to her place, I think. So yeah, that was all done. But then years and years, it didn't take. Was it just a year or so ago when Sue told us the rest of the story?
Yeah.
I didn't know. I just knew that Dad was not. He was not feeling he was feeling very vulnerable that night, and I didn't even realize that because we had all had supper together, and then John and I had to go up to Upper Iowa because we had studying to do. We went up to the library, and I didn't even realize that, or maybe I did, that he was the president of the Upper Iowa Conference, and
Right.
they had a meeting that night. I don't know if it was in West Union or at Fayette or something.
Right.
And of course he never made it because of the issues and whatnot. And but from what Mom said, I did get this from her, that he was getting to the point where it was harder and harder for him to keep himself under control. He kind of felt like he was backpedaling to where he was when after Mary Beth had died, that it was harder for him to handle life, and he was afraid that he was going to end up back in a psych ward or something. And that was, of course, weighing on him and everything else. But I think at that point, I think he had a massive anxiety attack. I mean, they called it a heart attack, but I think he had a massive anxiety attack. And but anyway, yeah, I didn't know that he had that conversation with Sue on the landing.
Right.
You know, and I'm not going to be here tomorrow. And in a way, I think he was thinking he wouldn't be there because he would be someplace else in a hospital or something.
Sure, that could be.
But when, you know, who knows whether he, you know, of course, John swore that he was one of those psychics that he could tell what was going on before it happened. John had that theory more than once, that, you know, that was Dad. He knew what was going to happen before it did. And anyway, but that was his opinion. But no, by the time we got to the house, he was gone, and Dr. Lingy was gone, and Grandma was back in her apartment, and there wasn't much left in the house, I think, other than the family. I think. I'm not really sure who all was there when we got there, but I do remember that. It was just that moment. So yeah.
Yeah, actually, because I can remember, I thought everybody was in the main living room with the top ceiling light on.
Yeah.
And they brought his body downstairs, wrapped up on the stretcher thingy.
Right.
And see, I guess I thought I remember Dr. Carl being there giving a prayer.
Could have been.
I guess I figured you and John were there, but you must not have been.
Nope. We got there. We got there very much after the fact. I mean, the ceiling light in the living room wasn't on. It was the normal lights were on. It was like every other night. You know, there were a few lights on in the living room, and in the kitchen, the light over the sink was on like it always was.
Yeah.
There wasn't a whole lot. I mean, the house itself, there wasn't a whole lot different than the house that we left after supper.
Yeah.
I remember throwing my books on the counter as soon as Mom told me that Dad had died. But and again later on it connected. Hey, you know, you've been here before, and like that. So that was quite a night.
Because and then didn't Dr. Lingy give Mom something to sleep that night?
Could have. Yeah, with Lingy, who knows? He probably did. I
thought I remembered something about the fact that they were going to give her some sedative or something to be able to sleep at night.
Yeah, it's very possible that he did, and knowing Mom, I'm not sure she did or not, but you know, but yeah.
Okay. So your good story about Sue.
My favorite story about Sue was, well, we joke about the window incident, but my big story about Sue was when she kept bugging me with all her dolls in Grand Junction.
Oh, yeah, that's a good story.
I tossed him down the stairs. I had enough. So that was Sue.
Okay, your John story.
John and I probably I had more stories with John growing up when we were young uh, than when we got into high school. We became a little bit more our own selves. And then, of course, when we got in college, he was going one way and I was going the other. And, we were always kind of at school, we were in band together. But then he ended up kind of with his own friends, and I had mine, and like that. Um,
Yeah, he had the nerd friends, you had the cool friends.
Supposedly, yeah. But yeah, a couple of things with John. He was when Mary had died, when Mary Beth had died, he he had this recording of E power Biggs playing Toccata and Fugue in B minor.
Yeah.
He played that over and over and over and over and over and over again.
When Mary Beth died?
Yes.
What?
Yeah, he played that incessantly after Mary Beth died.
Like where?
It must have been upstairs because we didn't, and I think that portable record player we had that we got
Yeah.
in Eden, I think he had that upstairs, or he took it upstairs or whatever.
Oh.
And yeah, he played that recording. He had gotten it for Christmas, I think, that year, and because he had become infatuated with Bach, as we know, and but he played that incessantly.
Like Bach organ things, or prelude and fugues, or what?
Yeah, the da 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 diddle diddle dum dum.
Oh, that's definitely, okay.
Yeah, he played that incessantly after Mary Beth had died, and then of course his thing on the piano, he was always playing wrong.
Yes, his self-taught thing.
Yeah, he was always practicing. He was practicing it wrong. He wasn't practicing to get better. He was practicing to make the same mistake time after time after time after time.
I know.
But again, that was kind of a key with John. He was, when he would throw himself into something, whether it was reading or his piano or whatever, that became his obsession. I think he was kind of an obsessive person to that.
Well, I think in some ways he wanted to amplify. He wanted to be like Granddad Clinton and having projects. But it's like the deal with John was he would start something and then it would just go by the wayside.
Yeah. And Dawn and I have talked about this, but John said growing up that he never wanted to be like DeWitt. I'm not going to be DeWitt. I'm not going to be like DeWitt.
No, really
not.
I never heard
enough,
that
he kind of was.
I got that right.
All of that. He was always going off and doing something outlandish or whatever. And and it was up to us or Mom to pick up the pieces. And I've always said this, but I really felt had Dad lived, that would have taken a different turn down the road, because he had Mom figured out and played her for whatever his advantage was, but he also knew that whenever he crashed, she was there to catch him, and like that. And I think DeWitt was the same way. He could be DeWitt and he could do what he wanted because he knew that Grandma and Grandpa would always be there, and he never spent any money. So, and I think that was part of his upbringing. It was the frugality of the Clinton philosophy,
right?
And even when he had his own money to spend or whatever, when I took over his books, it amazed me how much money he had in his checking account, and then because he never spent any money. But then he would write a check for $1, to go buy something, postage or some crackers or something.
I'm sure that wouldn't surprise Heidi.
No, and and he never had any money, but when he did, like I say, he would write a check for $1 or $2 or something.
Oh, brother.
And like that. But so when I took over his bills, which were not that much, he was getting Social Security on top of that, and then of course he had that annuity Grandpa Clinton, again, you going back to what a financial wizard he was. When he got those annuities for Mom and for DeWitt, they were solid investments. And it was like, Granddad always joked that he was making interest every year off his own death because he prepaid his funeral arrangements. So every year he would get an interest statement or a refund or something from that company because he was making money off his funeral, and he took great pride in that. But it's the same thing with DeWitt. And his annuity, DeWitt's annuity, took care of Mom after he died, and then I benefited for it a while before it finally ran out. But but it was a solid investment, which didn't surprise me because Granddad was the one who bought it, and he understood what was going on. So like that.
Okay, well, I suppose I got to ask the question: your favorite story about me?
Well, that's easy. The horse incident.
Oh, at Ingowanis?
Yes, I have two things about you that was clearly a classic. I mean,
Okay, well, go ahead,
just
go ahead
stand
and
there.
tell the story for those of us listening on the video.
Well, okay, and I happen to be working in the summer as a commissioner on the adult staff.
Which means what?
And you came to Ingowanis that week.
Tell people what a camp commissioner is.
A camp commissioner is responsible for coordinating the scheduling for the week's activities. On Sunday night, you have a certain number of troops that you're supposed to be in charge of, and you sit down with the scout leader and say, okay, how many people are going to be doing swimming? How many people want to do horseback riding? How many people want to do this and this and this? So you do that all on Sunday, and then you sit down Sunday night as department heads, and with all of the department heads from the wranglers, the
different areas, right?
Swimming in all the areas, and then that's the way you do your schedule. And then on Monday, either Sunday night after the bonfire or Monday morning first thing, you get out to the campsites and you say, okay, this is your schedule for the week, and this is who's going here and here. You have swimming now, you have horsemanship now, and you have first aid now, and canoeing, and so on and so on. And then, of course, the other thing that the commissioners got to do is you got to inspect the campsites and like that. And so, okay, I was doing all of that, and I went down to the horse barns to check with them and if scout troops were interested on taking a trail ride or an overnight camp out or whatever, then you were in charge of scheduling those. And I'd gone down to the horse barns to schedule.
My 2 cents worth in the fact that this is my first year of being at a Boy Scout camp. Fayette didn't have enough people to take a whole troop, so I just went and they threw me into with a troop of the other people.
Okay, and I don't remember that. I just knew you were there that week.
Anyway, okay, so yeah, you're coming down.
So I'm down at the horse barns.
And Ingowanis is famous for their horse arena. I mean, that's
absolutely. That was one of the things that Camp Ingowanis had that nobody else did, at least in Iowa.
Right.
They had their own horse program, and it was a very well run program. They had a really nice horse barn. They had a nice herd of horses. They were very well kept. And the guys that were running that program, they're all called the Wranglers. And so I'd gone down to the horse barns to schedule this trail ride for a troop, and that happened to be when you were in horsemanship class. And what they did in horsemanship classes was they would show you the various commands. Okay, now you want to gallop, now you want to do this, and you want to do that. And the first thing that they always taught the scouts was how to put a saddle on a horse. And these horses were really good at this. They knew how to kind of bloat their bellies a little bit, so that when you were tightening that under strap, that would give them a little bit of breathing room. But it also meant that the saddle was going to be loose. And so the Wranglers would always take each one of the campers to do that. And all I can figure is that you had done everything you were supposed to be doing, because you were always that way. You would do what you were supposed to do, and you would put the saddle on your horse, and you were up in the saddle, and then what they did is when you were, before you started your routine for the day, they had all of the horses lined up next to each other. And then you would start with whatever the day's activities were. But while they were doing that, they would be talking to you about, okay, this is what we're going to do today and everything else. And so when I got done with what I was doing, my scheduling, I thought, oh, I saw you were out there, so I'll watch and see what's going on. And it was like you were sitting there, and all of a sudden, the saddle started moving, and I thought, uh-oh. And little by little, and then I hear, help, help me. And at that point, the saddle went over, and so did you, and like that. But it was a classic moment in rut history when little Tommy fell off the horse, because the horse had played you like those horses like to.
Yeah, no, because I remember they had the corral, where they do the shows at, but then over in that they had like a big field area where you kind of would learn, you can kind of get, so you could go with the horse, out kind of running a little bit or whatever. And I guess I remember we were just kind of out, circling around, and that's when I remembered the saddle just kind of going over on me. So.
Yeah. It was.
Hey, that's a pretty good story.
Not one of your best moments as a performer.
Well, but memorable.
But certainly memorable. So, and then the other thing I always remembered about you, especially in Fayette, is with a family like ours, where there was always somebody's talking about something, and you being the youngest, trying to get a word edgewise, I'm guessing, was a challenge. And there was once we were at the table and we were all talking, and all of a sudden you raised your hand, and and of course I think it was Mom said, "Yes, Tom." And Tom says, "I'm just trying to get a word in edgewise." It's the only thing I could do to talk is to raise my hand. And it was okay, fine, we'll shut up. I can't even remember what it was you had to say. But
well, I'm sure it was something very important.
I'm sure it was. And but you had gotten to the point where you had enough, and you couldn't even say what was on your mind because we were all so busy talking about something. And then the other thing with you is you're always in charge of doing the supper dishes. Right. And you would almost take them away from us before we were done with what we were doing.
Yeah.
It was like you wanted to get those dishes done so you could do your homework or watch TV or whatever it was you were doing. And of course, that the dinner table especially was kind of a social time for us. And that was when we were that classic Americana family that we were supposed to eat breakfast together. We were supposed to eat supper together, and it was always at 5 o'clock or whatever it was. But afterwards, then we would sit around and talk a little bit, usually. Of course, later on it got that we didn't, but yeah, you were always very efficient in getting your dishes done. So you couldn't wait to get those dishes off of there, so like that. So
yeah, I still kind of do that with my own family.
Yeah. Okay. Well, now they should know where it comes from.
Exactly.
And that, of course, piggybacks me off when you're talking about Sue stories. And she brings this up more than I can remember it. But when I start talking about you raising your hand at the table, that's another Sue story. Is after supper, I became Sue's math tutor because she definitely inherited her mother's lack of numbers. She had such a time struggling with basic math and everything else. I hours and hours and hours I spent at the dining room table with Sue in Fayette with math, working on her math. And in fact, she brings that up from time to time, but that's my other Sue story, is that she and math were just not dear friends at all. And good old Dave well, John wouldn't work with her because he was such a perfection-based person, and he couldn't understand how Sue couldn't figure those things out because they were so easy. Me being the average guy, I mean, with John, he had to have an A. With me, if I got a B or C, I was a happy guy, because I had other things to do, and B's and C's were fine for me, and but John could never understand. He just had no patience with Sue at all, because how could you not understand all of this? So at least I guess I had the patience to duke it out with she and the math book. And
yeah, I'm guessing if I asked Sue, her favorite teacher would not be Mrs. Pickett.
Oh my word. Yeah, she and Maggie Pickett were, oh my goodness, yeah, yeah. And there was one other teacher that, and it was concerning because after Dad died and he wasn't the superintendent anymore, there was one other teacher, I think, at Fayette that was kind of dissing on Sue. I can't remember what it was because I think she was in what, sixth grade at that point or something, or middle school or something. But she had a tougher time of it, and it was because of and maybe it was Maggie, maybe it was Mrs. Pickett. Yeah,
I'm sure Sue will tell me.
but I'm guessing if you said Maggie Pickett is not your favorite person, she would not argue that a bit. She would say, "Oh no, yeah, she didn't like Maggie at all." And,
Well, I will throw my 2 cents worth in that I thought it was very cool in Fayette sharing that room with you and John.
yeah, well, we didn't have a whole lot of choice at that point, but yeah, I'm glad you did because
Like you say, John's light would stay on forever because he's always studying.
oh yeah, yeah.
You know,
And did you know that desk that we had in Fayette where he spent those countless hours studying, that was my major project as a freshman in shop. I decided, and that was the reason I decided I wanted to do that desk bookcase combination, is because we needed a desk in that room, and the only space that possibly would have fit a desk was that little cutout in there. And so I told Mr. Peters that's what I wanted to do, and I wanted to make it out of walnut, and which was expensive, but anyway. So yeah, we that was how that desk came to be. Is that was one of my freshman shop projects at Fayette, and we finally got to the point where we didn't need it as a desk anymore, and I had those great big long legs, prefab legs that we had screwed on the bottom, and they were so unstable that I finally cut the desk part off and put short legs on it, and it's upstairs in our sunroom as a bookshelf, and yeah, it's pretty well made if I say so myself.
I should say so. Okay. And I guess it was very cool when we went to the Water Street house. You know, John got his own room, thankfully.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And it's like it was just you and me in that one room. And I always thought that was very cool because you had a cool stereo and
Yeah, yeah. I got that with, I think, with my newspaper money or my I get some money. I bought that. I got to go to, and I bought that at the electronics store in Waterloo, and it was a Panasonic, and it had a cassette player in it, which was cool.
Very cool.
It had those circular speakers.
I
It was
know.
kind of a futuristic thing.
It was.
And yeah, I remember I had that for years, and then finally the speakers had fallen off the shelf enough time that the little things underneath them broke off and
Yeah.
whatnot. But we had that for years, even when we were moving from house to house. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I think you got everything checked off my list.
That's it. Well, yeah, I've gone way beyond my list too. So I think we did good.
Okay. Well, if you think of something else you want to ever, I know it won't take much to get you to talk about something, but
No.
if you do you have a memory that comes along and you want to get it recorded, let me know and we'll
Okay.
catch up again.
Okay. Well, this is, I'm really glad you gave me the list because it once I started at square one, and then I went logically from place to place. And I kind of did the same thing when I was coming up with my thoughts about John for his honor hour. I thought, memories of my life with John and things like that. And I kind of started from square one. And I did the same thing with this. And on all those other side memories fell into place and like that. So yeah, it was really good structure. And I appreciate that. That was good. And
Cool.
like I say, I've never had any problem talking about stuff. So
I suppose you should probably tell your story. I know you said this, I think, at the honor hour, how it was that you picked trumpet, or you were given the trumpet.
oh yeah. Well, Dad was the band director, in addition to being the principal, and that when he moved there, he was the principal, the superintendent, and the band director, and in the story goes that, you know, when I was, it must have been the summer before my 5th grade year in school. Um, I happened to be walking. They always had summer band rehearsal on the stage in the gym at the high school, junior high, because I think the janitors were doing the floors and things like that in the elementary building, and so they couldn't get in the music room. So Dad always had the stage in the high school became his band room in the summer, and that's where he had summer band. And I happened to be hanging out or doing something uh, with him while he was having summer band practice. And the kid who was supposed to be the drummer didn't show up, or the bass drummer didn't show up. So he brought me up on stage and told me every time that stick that he was holding went down, I was supposed to hit the bass drum. And so I did, and got through rehearsal, and boy, I kept that beat and everything. And I knew at that point I was destined to be a percussionist. And of course, then it came time for him to start kids on band instruments. And I can't even remember if he tried kids out or if he'd look at a kid and say, okay, you're going to do this, and you're going to do this, and you're going to do this. But anyway, it came to me, and he said, okay, you're going to play cornet. And I was shocked. I thought, what? I didn't understand. And so he gave me, must have been a school cornet or something, and started me out on cornet. And subconsciously, I always felt that I should have been, was destined to be a drummer. But I got a cornet instead. And but then when I got to college and had to start learning all these instruments, and discovered how many different instruments are involved with percussion, including mallet instruments with keyboards. And I wasn't very good at piano anyway. And I thought, boy, am I glad I'm not a percussionist, and like that. So that's how I became to be a trumpet player. It's like John was a tuba player. And then of course when we moved to, or before we moved to Newton even, John wanted to play violin because Mom was a cello player, and he was always taken with string instruments. And so in addition to playing tuba, he took some lessons from the orchestra teacher at Newton on violin, and like that. But that's how I became a trumpet player. Is my dad, who understood what was what and what was good for people, did that. And then of course I'll follow up with my story about Alonzo Leach, because then when it came time to actually pick a trumpet for me, he took me to Des Moines to Alonzo Leach Music, which was an old store downtown, main part of downtown. You walk in and it was like, who knows when the last time it was cleaned, and things were put away, because it was that classic old music store where there was music everywhere and there were instruments everywhere. And he told Lonzo that his son was going to start playing cornet, and give me some of your cornets. And so Lonzo put out 5 different instruments, as I remember, and I picked my cornet, which turned out to be the most expensive because it had a red case. And I thought that was a cool case. And as it turned out, it was the top of the line King cornet with bells and whistles that some of I never used. But that lasted me until I was a junior in high school. And then I felt I was at the point where I just couldn't get much more out of the cornet. And then I got what I still have is my Bach Stradivarius trumpet that they got for me. And I've had it overhauled once and refinished once, and it's still kicking. It's good. It's
You got
good.
that one where?
I got that in Fayette, and that was at the point where, when I was a junior in high school, I got it, and that was also the point where the hot trumpet in bands was a silver Getson Doc Severinsen model trumpet, and they had just come out with it, and everybody had them or wanted one, and it had the push button Amato water keys, and I thought that was cool, and that was I was, in my mind, that was the one I wanted. But Dad being dead, and I think he really wanted me to play a Bach, but he got a hold of the main music company that was serviced us was Taylor Music in Cedar Rapids, and he had to bring up the Getson, the Bach, a Constellation, I think it was, and it was the top of the line Con, and another king trumpet, I think it was. The Con had a rose bell. I remember that. The Getson and the King were both silver instruments because I wanted to have a solo trumpet. But then, and then of course and then the Bach. And I played all of them in band, and I played them all the time. And I would go from one trumpet to the next trumpet, to the next trumpet. And it came right down to it. And I just couldn't get away from that Bach trumpet it was easier to play. It had a better sound. It was just a better instrument. And that was the one I picked. As it turned out, that was probably, and anybody was anybody right now as a Bach. And I like that. So I kind of kid that, I've had it so long now that people ask me, how old is it? And I said, I don't know, probably, if you look at the serial number, it's probably serial number 6 or something. But anyway, in fact, I had that conversation with Corey Schmidt the other day because he looked at my trumpet. We were playing, he and Don and I were playing in a brass group we were pre-recording the church service for Easter. And he saw that I had an older Strad. He said, that's an old one. And it was not necessarily the first batch, but it was in that earlier bunch of Bachs. But so that's me and my trumpet history.
Okay. I'll throw in also another thing. One of my best memories I have with you is in Fayette at that new house. You used to have that open field, where the house is built now.
Oh, yeah.
And every once in a while, when you had time, you'd go out there and you'd throw a football with me. And I thought that was so much fun.
Yeah. That was a nice, I was really, and I know that, again, that was one of the reasons they got the house was because they worked with the Thomases and said, well, we can afford the house, we can't afford a lot. And I didn't realize that he had bought that lot specifically so he would have the big lot, the big yard. But when he went to sell the house, he was selling the house and the lot. And I think in negotiations, that was what Dad said. We can buy the house, we can afford the house, but we can't afford the lot. And so Thomas, the guy, he says, well, okay, but you need to understand that if I get a good offer on that, I'll sell the lot. And we had that lot for several years before he finally sold it to that couple. And they put that prefab house on it. Yeah, that really bothered me when they did that. It just, I thought, okay. And it did. It took up the whole lot and like that. Now, the people that live there now, the house is showing its years, and I'm not sure that they've taken near as good a care as the people that initially had it. It's like that big mansion across the street, the big White House. That's shown its age too. I know it was from what I understand from Mom, it was the lady and her brother that lived there for years and years and years, and it was quite a show place, and it's still a beautiful house, but it's showing some years and some wear and tear. But the house next to our house on Water Street, it's showing a little bit of wear and tear too, And then of course the Methodist parsonage is showing definite wear and tear. It's not the old house, the beautiful old house it used to be.
Right. Yeah, and I think Mom brought that up in one of her videos, the fact that she remembered playing in that house in Water Street when she was a girl.
Yeah, she does. Yeah, she said it was a beautiful house.
Yeah.
It even was when we were living there. It always struck me as they took such good care of it. They were almost to a fault where, not that they ever got on us or anything else, but I think that I knew that they would get on kids if they were playing or something. They felt that it was encroaching on their space or their house or whatever. They were really sensitive to that, but probably for good reason. It was their house.
And of course, our parakeet ate up all the windowsills.
Yeah. Mom and her birds. Good grief. They did more damage to the windowsills and the things in that house. It was.
So did you want to say anything about? I assume you enjoyed being a High Wall State band chair.
it was probably one of the highest honors I think I've ever had. Yeah, I mean, I started out for 5 years, I think it was, as the assistant band chair, and then I was 6 years because you always did 2 3-year terms. So I had 6 years as the chair of the Allstate Band, and John Abowd told me, and I agree, that almost more than the Iowa Bandmasters president, the being the band chair of the Allstate Band, or the choir chair, or the orchestra chair, those are three of the most visible professional chair positions in Iowa. Everybody knows who the band chair is, and everybody knows, and even now, not quite so much as it used to be, but even now, especially in this area, if I'm going down and talking to somebody, or even a younger director, they don't know exactly who I am. They just know that I was the Allstate Band chair. But it was a great year, a great 6 year, especially experience. I got to meet some of the who's who, and recruit some of the who's who in the band world. I mean, Ray Kramer, and Pat Dunnigan, who's the director of bands at Florida State, and the guy who is at the director of bands at Ohio State, and now his assistant Scott. What's his name? Anyway, I've gotten to know and gotten to meet and gotten to work with some of the best conductors in the world, and then I also had the privilege, and that, to me, there are some guys, they walk around in there, it's the Allstate weekend especially, and they spend time hobnobbing with people, and there's a certain amount of things you have to do during the Allstate Festival. But any chance I got, I spent just watching these guys teach the Allstate, work with the Allstate Band. And I mean, because they were all master educators, and it always blew me away how fast they would connect with this group of 275 kids, or 260 kids, or whatever it was, how fast they would connect with this group. And because they had a X amount of time and X amount of rehearsals to play this grade 5 and grade 6 music. And, granted, the kids had, 2.5 weeks to prepare this music, but, the standards in the Allstate program are extremely high. And there's always that caveat that if you don't know your music and you don't make it through the chair auditions on Thursday night, we'll send you home. And we did that with some kids. Sometimes it wasn't because of that; it was because of disciplinary things, like kids being where they weren't supposed to be, and like that. But it was a great experience, and I know that I was very glad that Mom got to experience that with us. And I was glad that I had the opportunity to have her come to the concerts while I was doing that, because I know that she mentioned to me 3 times how proud Dad would have been that I was doing what I was doing, and that meant a lot too. That was an outstanding experience. In fact, I still, right now, I talk with Thad Driscoll, who's the current chair, and he's always so gracious to talking to me about and so respectful, the fact that I've done what he's doing now, and like that. So that's always kind of cool too.
I know that will be one of my favorite memories of my lifetime, is that when you called Sarah.
Yeah. That was kind of cool to have your niece in the Allstate Band, for gosh sakes. That was kind of cool. Yeah.
Would you like to share with the audience what happened?
You'll have to refresh me, but I don't know.
Okay, well, she had tried out her freshman year because we had a really hot guy on union.
Yeah.
And of course, she was really bummed she didn't make it to her first year, because I think he had, or something. But he was like a couple years ahead of her.
Yeah.
Then I think she tried out her second year and she got recalled, so that was kind of cool. So then she tried out her third year and she got recalled, and she got first alternate.
Yeah.
So in the Allstate situation, first alternates mean that you're.
That's right. Yeah, I had an opening, and
you're pretty good, but they don't think you up to the standard, or they've already used up. Each district is allotted so many people.
Right. Right. And that in your district, they didn't fill their quota of euphoniums. And as a standard, the all-state chair, it's up to them to pick from the list of first alternates. And if they get through the first alternates, then you go to the second alternates like that. But I always told the all-state auditors, and it's always an understanding of the all-state auditors, that if you're going to designate somebody as an alternate, you need to write something. You have to give me a reason why I should pick that person. And looking at the list of first alternates on euphonium that I had, Sarah's description from her auditor was just glowing. You know, I'm sorry that I couldn't have an extra slot to give, because I would give it to this girl. And so it made my job easier. It wasn't nepotism or anything. I mean, Sarah was hands down the one that I was going to pick, and I was excited to do that, certainly. But yeah, and then I was.
So then, yeah, I think it was probably the Monday after All-State tryouts.
Yep.
You went ahead and called me and asked if she was there, and I said she was, and so you talked to her, and you basically let her know that you'd be sending out the materials to Spencer because she was going to be in the All-State.
Yeah. That was, and that's one of the privileges, or one of the joys of the job. And in that case, she happened to be my niece, but I also knew she was a really good player, and it came through with the auditor saying I mean, they may have seen Rutt on the end of her name, but usually those kids coming in, they have to be objective. And I can't even remember who the judge was for that particular center, but it was a good one. And when he said what he said on the card, I thought, oh, this is cool. But I thought, okay, I'm gonna give her a call, and you know, theoretically you're not supposed to do that, but I did it anyway. So it was, I played the John Clinton card, I guess. If you're gonna do it that way, I thought, okay, this is a cool time, and she's gonna be celebrating in a couple of days anyway. So yeah, let's go for it. So yeah.
Well, and like you said, it helped your cause. That, of course, then the next year when she was a senior, she tried out. She actually did make it.
Yeah.
So she really was an All-State caliber the year before.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it helped. I guess it helped solidify, in my opinion, that I knew she was a good player, but she took the bull by the horns as a senior and did all the work herself. She just got right in, and it didn't surprise me a bit, because I knew that she had that drive, and that's what she was going to do, and I knew that. So it was cool that I could give her that opportunity a year earlier, because she had earned it, and I like that. So.
Okay, so flip it. So when you were in high school, All-State?
We used to laugh at that. All three of us, band chairs, we used to laugh at that, because what?
You're taking too long. I'm going to go to Mason City and get this stuff.
Oh,
Just drive time alone.
I need to go, I guess. But
Okay.
Let's see, where were we at?
So what about All-State when you were in high school?
Oh, All-State. The three All-State chairs, none of us were All-Staters.
Had they tried out?
Oh yeah, but when I was in All-State trying out, you had to get in, and we were these little kids in the block, and we were trying out with the Cedar Rapids schools and everybody else, and in your mind is like, there's no way. And even though John had gotten in, but I thought, okay, this is gonna be hard, and I thought it would be easier for me to get in on chorus. So I was part of a quartet for 4 years, trying out for All-State as a vocalist. And, but that was back when they either took the whole quartet or they didn't take anybody.
Right.
And it was my senior year when I didn't make All-State again. It was at Cedar Rapids Prairie, and I didn't make it again. And I thought, okay, that was one of those head slapping moments. Like, what an idiot. I should have tried out on trumpet. but that was so I told people, I said, just because you don't make, and we've used that example for years when kids would not make All-State, and they were all bummed about it and everything else, and they were talking about, I didn't make it, the world is over, and I would say, it's not over, and I used me as an example, and like that, I said, I've never made All-State, and here I am in charge of the whole thing. So, but that was my All-State history. I tried out for 4 years locally, thinking it was the easier way to get in, only to realize my senior year that what a stupid person I was. I should have tried out on trumpet. But
yeah, see, and my way is the other way. It's like I always thought it was cool to try and get in the band, and I always had kind of like Sarah had, these people in my district are always really good. And so that's one thing that always kind of bugged me is, well, why didn't I ever try at least 1 year tryout on choir? Because I always felt like I was a good enough singer. I probably could have made it. But there you go. I mean, you can what if it if all you. I guess the best thing you say is at least you tried.
Okay. So anyway, I'm sorry, I had to read this.
Okay.
Yeah.
Let's call it a day.
Okay. Yeah, we gotta go to Mason City and do our shop.
Okay, well, very well done.
Thank you.
Thank
Thanks
you,
for
Dave.
doing this.
We'll see you later.